So really being in the operating room is something that's super interesting to me, especially having an engineering background and knowing how these devices are made and how they should function is really helpful for me as I interact with the surgeons. Obviously, they're incredibly bright people, and they know how to treat their patients well, but they haven't necessarily used your product before, or they haven't necessarily mastered the use of it. So imagine someone's going in for, broken bones, etc. They have to put in screws, metal plates. They have to make sure that everything is oriented properly so that the patient's range of motion is not impacted. So that's kind of the role that the reps play. They recommend which screws, which plates to be inserted. They take a look at the images, the x-rays with the surgeons, and recommend placement of those screws, those plates, etc. That's kind of the fun part, and that's the part of the job that I love the most. There's also a portion of the job that is a bit more sales-like, and that, for me, I mean, I love communicating and talking with people, but just having to cold call is not super enjoyable. So I've had the experience of working with a small distributor and small manufacturer where I've had to do a lot of that. And now I'm transitioning more into working for those bigger companies. One that I've got on my list is Abbott, where you don't have to do as much cold calling because they're just really well recognized. And it's a lot more technical. So I get to use some of the technical knowledge that I developed studying bioengineering. So I'm really looking forward to that. Let's see. Ms. Klaus gave me some other questions to talk about. So I think I went over the day-to-day quite a bit. Just it takes a lot of organization. You have to plan out which hospitals you need to go to, which surgeons you're going to be working with, which products you need to have on hand. So it takes a lot of planning before you even start working. And then, in your free time, you really need to be using that well to go do any kind of sales things, any kind of business planning, really setting yourself up and being super organized. There is a bit of travel, so it's more of a field role rather than working from an office or working at home. I basically would work in the hospital or in doctors' offices all the time. I'm never really in one place for too long. And for some of the bigger companies, there's a lot of travel involved. So there's a role that I'm thinking of doing moving forward that would have me traveling to Las Vegas probably a few times a week, to Northern California. Sorry, I should say I'm located in San Diego now. So I'd fly to Las Vegas probably twice a week to work in hospitals there, fly up to Northern California. I don't know how often, but probably up to 75% travel, which means 3 out of the 5, or maybe even 4 out of the 5 nights a week I'm traveling. I personally enjoy traveling, so I like that. I know that can be a burden for some people, but then again, there are roles where you're very localized. There are roles where you're just in San Diego, you cover maybe 5 hospitals in the San Diego area, and that's about it. And that kind of keeps you busy enough. So it really depends on which specialty you're involved in and which company that you're working for. Let me take a look at some of the other questions that you sent me. Do you like it? What's your favorite part? What's your least favorite part? So I think I touched on this a little bit. I love being in the operating room. Being in these surgeries is really, really fulfilling for me because I have a strong interest in where technology and medicine intersect and helping patients get back to living the lives that they want to be living. And so that's super fulfilling for me, is just having an impact with how this doctor is treating this patient. One of the roles that I'm considering moving forward is heart-related problems, specifically very, very young children and babies. And that's something that I believe would be just incredibly impactful, to say that I have a role in helping these young children and these parents help their child become healthy again, help their hearts function as they normally would. And it's a really, really technical product, a device that requires a lot of information from the rep to reveal to the surgeon during that procedure. So I'd feel like I was actually doing more, and it would be more of a challenge as well.
Now I'm putting you up on the big screen, but I had to go to another place. So hopefully, all right. I don't know what that means. Got it. All right. If you press got it on there, press
Good.
on there.
I'll just continue though with the most and least favorite part. Least favorite part I also touched on is having to do some of that cold calling or prospecting or just randomly going up to new surgeons who don't know you yet, and telling them about your products, just because it gets a really bad reputation of people who only want, your business. They don't care about you as a person. So it really takes a personality to try to build a relationship rather than just say, hey, look, here's my product, use it so that I can make a sale. That's not my personality. My personality is like, I want to help in any way. And so if I can, let's partner up here. I'm not out just to get a sale. If they don't want me, I'm not going to be one to push too hard to get that. And there are some sales reps that are just very cutthroat. They don't care if they're helping you. They just want the sale. So that's maybe the part I like least about it. Let's see. Oh, you talked about the path, education, et cetera, for this position. I will say, being a medical device rep, being in the operating room does not necessarily require an engineering background or a bioengineering background or really anything in the biology medicine realm. There's a lot of people who are just business majors, econ. There is in some of these job descriptions paths that say if you just have 4 years of experience rather than a degree, you can get these jobs. I will say, I think a degree makes you a lot more stronger of a candidate for these positions than just trying to go out and get your first kind of job and 4 years of experience to get into these positions. Let's see. One of the notes says starting salaries for these. They do start off paying pretty well, and there's a lot of salary growth. So when you start out, you can make anywhere from like, I don't know, 60 to 90K a year. And then after a few years, the next role bumps up to like 120 to 150. And then after that, if you have like 6 or 7 years of experience, the salary goes up really, really quickly to 300,000 plus a year. So they do have really nice salaries. They work people very, very hard. I would say that. In some positions, like if you're working trauma, which is a rep who basically has to come in anytime there's an accident and someone is seriously injured, anytime someone breaks a bone, it's a very serious injury, those reps basically have to be on call 24/7. And so you might have a team of 2 or 3 people in your area covering those hospitals, and only one person has to be on call at all times, but you will have to take call, which basically means like, right, if there's an accident, a car accident, if someone gets hurt playing a sport, if someone falls really hard and they have a broken bone, you're the one coming into the hospital. It doesn't matter if it's Saturday night or Sunday morning at 2 a.m., you have to come in when you get that call. So there is quite a bit of work there. And it really just depends on the company that you're working for. If I could give any advice, it would be ask people about the work-life balance of the company. For example, I had one interview where the conversation went really well. She said she had, no issues with moving me on to the next round of the interview. And I asked her what the work-life balance was like, and she said, you would probably be working 60 to 80 hours a week. So I don't know if you're familiar, that's like double the normal working hours. Normally people work 40 hours a week and that's it. So it was definitely quite a commitment. And I was like, I don't think I want my life to look like that, working all the time, being on call whenever, and not really having any flexibility to make plans. So that's definitely something to consider with this career path. But then there are companies that really value your work-life balance and have people in place to spread out that work so that you're not on call every weekend or even every other weekend, which is really nice. Let's see. Are there an abundance of jobs like this? That's a really, really good question. That's something that Ms. Klaus sent to me. The answer is no. There are not a ton of positions. It is very competitive to get something in the medical device world because of those reasons I talked about earlier, where it's like one of the very few positions that you can get into the operating room without a doctor's degree, without like some higher level of education, or even even nursing school. You go to some school after you get your bachelor's degree. So really, without having that extra education, this is one of the few roles that gets you into the operating room. And it's a really cool experience for people who like that, like me. I love that. And so, it makes sense that it's a very, very competitive position. Also, the fact that the salary is very competitive, it just makes the positions really scarce and they go by really, really quickly. So yeah, it's something to keep your eye on. I always keep an eye on LinkedIn, on job openings. When something that's really interesting opens up, I'll apply for it, because it never hurts to interview or get your name out there for another company that you might like better, or you might just want to learn more about. So that's kind of where my head is at. I feel like those are most of the questions that I covered. I know I covered that pretty quickly. Should I just open it up for questions now? Does that sound good?
You guys have questions for him? Yell it out.
It's fine if you don't.
I have questions.
Yeah.
Hey, look at that, we're up there. Okay, so I probably missed this at the beginning. Did you talk about what you did at your job in Denver?
I didn't. I can talk about that though.
Yeah, because that was kind of the first job you got out of school. Did you have an internship there?
Yeah. Yeah, I can go over that path a bit more in depth. That sounds good. So junior year of college is kind of when you start applying for internships, or sophomore year you start applying, but I got my internship junior year, and it was at the company DaVita that I ended up working for full time. It's a large Fortune 200 healthcare company. For a lot of people, it's a very, very nice, very good internship. Looks really good on a resume. And they liked me at the internship, and they offered me a full-time position. And like I said, I liked all the people that I worked with, and so I accepted it. And my role was primarily a business analyst. And then when I was promoted a senior business analyst, I was responsible for several metrics across the business. So it was still healthcare, right? So we had patients that we cared for, that we treated, and the metrics that I was responsible for was making sure that they were attending their treatments and making sure that they were staying out of the hospital. Because if they're staying out of the hospital, that means they're staying healthier, and that they're able to spend time with their family rather than spending that time in a hospital bed. The company also had like financial incentives for that too, right? If they were treating their patients, they got some revenue from treating patients. If the patient went to the hospital, they usually took some kind of hit in terms of expenses to pay for the patient's treatment at the hospital instead of having that treatment at our own facilities. So those are the metrics I was responsible for. I was basically doing what's called operations. So what kind of processes can we put in place to make sure our patients attend treatment more? Like navigating the realm of like, oh, can we offer them incentives to come to treatment, incentives to adhere to like a healthy diet, etc. There's some legal things in the way of that. So, we couldn't always offer incentives, but that's like what I was responsible for coming up with. Those ideas of, how can we maintain a really strong performance in these metrics? On a day-to-day though, it was less exciting than that. It was like building slides and analyzing data. And oftentimes I was frustrated because I didn't get to present on the slides that I created, on the presentations that I put together. I sent them off to my manager or my director, and they presented on it. Or I created all this data and they looked at it, and not much came from it. So there was a bit of frustration there. And I just kind of realized, like, I feel like I need something that's a little bit more of a dynamic environment. Now, a lot of people do like working in the business world. It's very, I would say it's very comfortable. You do develop skills. There's a lot of training involved there. So it really helps you to just improve as an overall, person. If that's your career path, it helps you improve overall and gain skills that are necessary for your career too. Let's see what else.
Next question. So tell us a little bit about your major at UCLA. Like, it sounds like, actually tell them like how you applied as a different major and changed, because no one thinks you can do that. You're like my example. I always tell them.
I'm really impressed that you remember that. You have a very good memory.
Yeah, that's all I remember. Some people, like, I know you, but I will mostly remember what they majored in and not their name. But I know you, so I remember your name.
That's funny. Yeah, so I applied. Well, first of all, I'll give this point of advice. pay a lot of attention to where you apply and what you apply for. I did not. I just kind of put down things that I was interested in and applied and figured like, oh, I can just change my major whenever, right? So I think at like Cal Poly Slow, I applied for bioengineering. Most other places I applied for like neuroscience or something else in the science and medical field. So UCLA, I applied as neuroscience. However, once I got to orientation, really even before I started school, I was like, well, I actually don't want neuroscience. Bioengineering I applied for as my secondary option. And I figured I could just kind of quickly change between them. I asked them at orientation if I could do that. And they actually said the process was a bit more formal and a bit more difficult. And they thought, oh, I would actually try out neuroscience if you think that there's even a remote possibility you want to do it, because the process of changing is permanent and it takes a while. But what I had to do was I had to take 2 or 3 quarters, I think 1 full year of engineering courses. You had to have your GPA above a certain amount. And then you had to write a letter to like the dean or someone in engineering telling them why you want to do engineering. And my letter was basically like, hey, I found out I wanted to do engineering before I even started. I really didn't put enough thought into my major selection and picked neuroscience almost by accident, just like didn't really put thought into it. But I wanted the options that bioengineering gave me to go either into industry, research, or I could also kind of go into med school if that was my path. So I did that. I did the full first year of engineering courses, really didn't take any neuroscience courses at all because I knew I wanted to do bioengineering, and I was able to transfer in. Now, I do know people who transferred into engineering a little bit later in the year, and they struggled because they missed those first year and a half, maybe even first 2 years of engineering courses. So when you're junior and senior, you come around and you're taking your upper division classes that are just much, much more challenging. They had to combine that with an increased engineering workload because they're catching up for missing out on those first and second year of engineering classes, if that makes sense. So that was kind of changing my major to engineering. In terms of what bioengineering entails, I can go into a bit more detail on that. Your first and second year are basically math, physics, and life science classes. You're taking your like prerequisites for your upper division courses. This is kind of what all engineers take, except for life sciences. Other engineers don't take that. But then you move into starting early sophomore year, your first upper division courses where you really get into like the meat and bones of engineering. And with bioengineering, there's a big focus at UCLA, at least, on research. So there's a lot of like microfluidics. Like, I don't know if you're aware of companies like Illumina. They're working on sequencing individual genomes. So like you can go to Illumina and pay a certain amount and they'll totally sequence your genome. And they can tell you a little bit about like what diseases you're susceptible for and things like that. They do that in a very specific bioengineering type way where they take, a portion of your DNA, they run through this microfluidics device, and they're able to kind of amplify your DNA and sequence that genome. So we learned about the technology behind a lot of that, a lot of ways to, do like DNA sequencing, to do like diagnostics testing for certain diseases. So like COVID testing and things like that. We learned a lot about the science behind all of that. And then we got into classes that were more focused on medical devices, how they function, what diseases they cure, how they're created. So we did do another portion of like mechanical and electrical engineering as well in the bioengineering curriculum.
Wow. So do you think that all that engineering has helped you with this roles that you have, just because when you go in the operating room, you know kind of what they're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely gives me a different perspective on problem solving. I think just like any career, it's no replacement for experience. So there are people who have been in the operating room for 5, 10, 15 years, and they're obviously going to know more than what I do, even though I have the background of like how it functions. But it does, like I said, give me a unique way to problem solve or to kind of connect the dots between some of the various things that I'm seeing there.
Okay, it is that bell was their time to go, but
All right.
You don't have to leave. Wait. Okay. Say goodbye. Thank you. Tell them thank you.